Welcome to this session. Today we shall be talking about capital budgeting, and the capital budgeting is the most critical part when you are talking of project management. It is the sensitive area to which, before you commit large sum of money, you need to assess the project viability. You need to assess the project viability and those elements that are concerned with appraisal issues. So appraising means you will have to accept or reject your decision based on the cost estimates and revenue estimates, whether you should break the project or you should continue with the project. In this context, what we are going to discuss, we will discuss about the key elements of capital budgeting and also sensitive part of capital budgeting. This will include discussing about the technical appraisal, social appraisal, financial appraisal issues, social appraisal, and so on. All these are the issues that you need to take into account when you are making decision whether you should go ahead with the project or not. Some individuals are only focusing that section of financial appraisal, but you need to go beyond that one. Therefore, for this study today, we will go deeper and discuss beyond that one. This means we will talk about the basic elements of capital budgeting. That is about looking at the net present value, internal rate of return, the payback period, and accounting rate of return, profitability index. But again, these are not the only tools that we use for capital budgeting. We need to go beyond that one. What do we see here? Development projects impose a series of costs and the benefits too. This series of costs and benefits impose burden to recipient country, to community, to the intended stakeholders. Those costs and benefits can be of social, can be of environment, can be of economic in nature, or may involve so many things. When we talk about public investments, typically occur through selections, design, and also implementation of specific projects in order to achieve a particular goal. And therefore, if a public investment is being set somewhere, it requires a large sum of money. And with that case, you need to scientifically approve or disapprove the project, to continue or not to continue, to accept or not to accept, to reject or not to reject, depending on the scientific decisions that are drawn up for this estimate, and that's what we call it capital budgeting. Now, and these are the tools that we use when we are about assessing investments viability. So it may be for a commercial project, or it may be for a non-commercial project. But we need to assess. We need to assess. We need to assess. And this is where we need to involve the capital budgeting. As projects involve larger resources, wrong project decisions are very expensive to correct. You should know that. And managers are responsible for comparing and evaluating alternative projects so as to allocate limited resources and maximize the firm's worth. If you are like that, that should be the trend for a manager. How do you maximize the welfare of stakeholders? So basic techniques for evaluating proposed projects is needed, and that is the capital budgeting. Capital budgeting is not only focused in the project, but there are other considerations of which you need to take into consideration. And among those is the social appraisal issues, financial appraisal, economic appraisal, technical appraisal, institutional appraisal issues, gender appraisal, environmental appraisal. So these are the key areas when we talk about consideration for project. Other consideration for projects you will have to take into consideration. You need to analyze your project from society point of view. You need to analyze your project from financial point of view. You need to analyze your project from economic point of view. You need to analyze your project from technical point of view and also from institutional point of view. You need to assess your agenda, participation in your project. Also, you will need to examine about the environmental impact assessment. So you need to evaluate whether the project is going to bring hazards to environments. You need to assess that one and get permission to pollute or not to pollute. Now, what is capital budgeting? Capital budgeting is the process of determining which real investment project should be accepted and given an allocation of funds from firms. Or capital budgeting involves evaluating and it's about evaluating a project. Which project should be accepted? Which project should be accepted? Which project should be rejected? But here you're looking at the way on how you can maximize shareholders' wealth in line with the project. So to evaluate the capital budgeting process, they are consistent with the goals to the shareholder maximization is very important for any manager. Now, capital budgeting is required by most managers. You need to use that one. So this is the most required managerial tools in project. One duty of the financial manager is to choose investment with a satisfactory cash flow and rates of return. And therefore, financial manager must be able to decide whether an investment or project is worth to be undertaken or not. So you need to advise this. So you need to look at different versions. What are the factors to consider during capital budgeting? Of course, you will have to consider the size of investments. You see, what is the size of investment by itself? You need to consider the phases of the investment expenditure itself. What is the phase? The period between the initial investments and the assets actually generating revenue and profits for the business. The economic life of the project, the level of certainty regarding the project cash flow, the working capital requirement, the degree of risk involved in the project. Those are the things that you will have to consider. Now, so there are so many other factors that you'll be required to consider. What are the methods for capital budgeting? Of course, you need, can the project be financed? This is the first question you will have to ask yourself. Will there be sufficient funds to cover the expenditure requirements during the life of the project? So there are different techniques that you may find yourself using. One of them is to use the net present value, or you can use the internal rate of return, or you can use the payback period, or you can use the profitability index, or the so-called accounting rate of return. And as I said, this includes an analysis of economic soundness of the project and the quantification and evaluation of costs and benefits to ensure financial viability. So this is very important. What are the projects? What are the projects that require capital budgeting? Any projects that is expected to generate returns, you need to take into consideration for that one. So, for example, the power plant projects, school projects, dam constructions, transport projects, farming projects, commercial farming projects, manufacturing industry, textiles, investments, etc. No project should be recommended for implementation when found to be not viable. So you should know that if it's not viable, you need to reject that one. Now, let me share screen with you right here. Let me share screen with you so that you can know what is happening regarding capital budgeting, because it is very important. We should share this together. As I said here, that there are different types of approaches that we can use, but we will focus into those ones that you see right there, the capital budgeting methods. You can go to the options where you consider the time value of money concepts, or you can ignore the time value of money. But when you consider the time value of money, it means you will have to take the net present value, internal rate of returns, and when you take when you ignore the time value of money, then you'll have to take the payback period, the accounting rate of returns. With the time value of money, it is very important because money do not get constant. The value of money depreciates depending on the changes on inflation rates. So when inflation rates changes, the value of money is being affected, and a shilling today is much worth than a shilling tomorrow. So long as you are considering the time value of money, that should be the focus. So what are the factors leading to the changes in the value of money? Is one of them is opportunity cost of money, erosion of purchasing power due to inflation, and also uncertainty and risky. So these are the factors that you'll find yourself finding it very useful when you're considering on the time factor. Now, when we talk about the net present value, the net present value approach to investments, this concept require that all cash flows are discounted to the present to allow for the time cost of money. The discounted cash flow can be then summed to determine whether the investments is expected to produce surplus or deficit. So, and a positive net present value, or NPV, indicate that capital committed to an investment can be recovered. The interest rate cost can can be covered, and also surplus can be generated. The surplus or net present value is an estimate of increment in the worth that an investment is expected to produce. So the formal statement for the net present value is just accept when net present value is greater than or equal to 0, and also reject when you find net present value is less than 0. So that is the basic formula on how we can compute the net present value. And also we say in the NPV, that is NPV, net present value, is equal to initial investments, that is CO, plus cash flow at year 1 over 1 plus R, plus cash flow at year N, 1 over 1 plus R power N. So that is the basic formula that we use when we are computing the net present value, or that can be simplified further for one-time formula. When you have initial cash flow, initial investments plus cash flow at year 1 over 1 plus R power T. So the NPV is positive, and therefore the investment proposal should be accepted. And what are the advantages? It takes the time cost of money into account. It takes all the cash flow associated with the project into account. It obeys the value of additive principles, as the net present value of the projects is measured in monetary terms. It is possible to add them up to assess their combined impact. It is directly related to the overall objective of maximizing the value of the equity. It produces the correct ranking of mutually exclusive investments. It produces a simple and correct evaluation of projects having more than one rate of return. And it can also allow differences in a discount rate over time. So that's why it's very important for you to use. So there are different approaches that you can use. Sometimes you can be required to calculate the rate of return to find I, as you have seen in the formula. So you will have to determine the rate of return given the one period of time. That's profit of investments. That will give you I. Or you can still use the same formula for NPV. And you can see the way it has been derived right here, and collecting the equal-likely items. That is what we have. Sometimes you may not be knowing the exact interest rate, how much is that going to be, but when you have that formula for net present value, that by itself, it can show you the derivation. That is one of example of which you can do it by yourself. But if you have any question, you can also still ask me in the class. This is another activity that will be required to do. If a project requires an outlay of £500 and is expected to produce a single net cash flow of 1,245 at the end of the year 5, the rate of return is how much? So you will need to compute it by yourself. But it is easier when you use the Excel. When you use Excel, you can compute your net present value very easily. So it has no complication. Can you compute within 2 minutes, within one minute, you are done with the net present value. So I would suggest get used to Excel. Excel is a very powerful tool for you to start using it and compute your net present value. Of course, when you come to the second tool is the internal rate of return. The interest rate at which the present value of an investment's cash flow sum to 0. So that is our internal rate of return. You need to find out the rate of return that will give you interest rate is equal to 0. So it is that interest we are looking for. It is that interest. So it's a measure of payoff of the project expressed in terms of percentage of the outlays on the projects. To determine whether the project is acceptable, the decision maker must compare the project internal rate of return with the opportunity cost, then compare with the other investments. That's what will be happening. The internal rate of return is the break-even discount rate, and is formed by trial and error. So this is one of the difficulties that involve when you are computing the internal rate of return. But as I said, the most preferable one is the net present value. That is the most preferable one. You can still use trial and error, but many companies prefer using net present value when computing project variability, or when determining the capital budgeting approaches towards the project. It is unlike the internal rate of return, where it is found through trial and error. So that is the problem. You can still use the internal rate of return when you are computing about capital budgeting in a project. Still, you can still find the same. So what we will say, IRR is very closely tied to net present value. And this is the rate of return that makes NPV is equal to 0. What are the requirements for internal rate of return? First of all, you need cash flow analysis must be first done. So you must do the cash flow analysis. You must determine that one. You need to know what are the costs, what are the benefits. Then you have to discount those ones. And also specify the internal rate of return that is acceptable. What is the acceptable internal rate of return? And project data used in computing the cash flow needs to be carefully examined. So you need to examine just like the way we said in the other classes. We have the payback period. You can use the payback period. The payback period is the amount of time necessary to recover an investment's initial outlay. So many people are using it, but you cannot use for big investment. You can use it to fix some short-term investments, and it's not considered the time value of money. So again, you will see this is not good. So these methods of investment appraisal simply ask the question, how long before I get money back? How quickly will the cash flow arising from the project exactly equal the amount of the investments? It is simply methods widely used in the industry, and is based on management consent to reimburse on initial outlay. If they have such consent, then they will have to go to use this one, but it do not take into consideration the time value of money. So with this criteria is accept payback period is less than required by investor, and reject the project when the payback period is greater than the required than that required by investor. So you will have to check by yourself. The advantage, long payback means capital tied up and the high investment risks. The methods also has advantage that involve quick, simple calculations and easily understood. Very simple. It is also unable to distinguish between projects with the same payback period, so you cannot use that one. Okay. Now, the accounting rate of return methods calculates the estimated overall profits or loss on an investment projects and relates that profit to the amount of capital investment and to the period for which it is required. A business will have required minimum rate of return for any investments. This is very much related to the cost of capital of the business. If the investments yields a return greater than the cost of capital, then the investments will be considered suitable and profitable. So you need to know. This is the basic formula on how you can compute your accounting rate of return. Basically, it is ARR is equal to average annual profit of average investments. So average annual profit, this includes the total project profit after depreciation and before interest, tax and dividends, divided by the estimated life of the projects, and also average investments, initial investments plus value of investments at project end divided by 2. So you will only accept the project when project accounting rate of return greater than the minimum required return, and reject project accounting accounting rate of return less than the minimum required return. That is the only advantage. It takes into account the overall profitability of the project. It is simple to understand and easy to use. Its end results is expressed as a percentage, allowing project of different sizes to be compared. So you can compare different size of the project. And also it is based on the accounting profit. That is the disadvantage. That is the disadvantage. So you don't know how this information were prepared. So it's very problematic when you are using that one. It is subject to fraud. It's subject to accounting information. So the ARR does not take into account the timing of cash flows, and also the ARR does not take into account the time value of money. You see, it does not take into account the cost of waiting to recoup the investments. You see, all those kind of things. And also the ARR takes no account of size of the initial investments. So those are the key challenges that you will find when you are using the accounting rate of return. But we have another one, that is profitability index. The profitability index, this is the profitability index, simply defined as the ratio of present value of an investment, expected positive net cash flow to its outlay. So profitability index is equal to present value of expected net cash flows of initial investments. As you can see from the formula over there, the decision rule is to accept the proposal if the index is greater than 1. And also this produces the same accept, reject decision as the basic NPV criteria. For the index to be greater than 1, the present value of the benefits must exceed the value of the outlay, and this implies a positive NPV. You see, let me say this: if you have any question, if you have any question for this lecture, please, you may contact me through your phones. My phone, actually, you can contact me through my phone. My phone number is 0756 445 652. So let's keep in touch. Let's discuss. This is very critical for you in this area. You need to know what is happening within project. You cannot run a project without looking at capital budgeting. You must examine the capital budgeting. You must read the capital budgeting. You must use financial tools to decide whether you should continue with the project or you should not continue. And you should be assessing you should be assessing. Of course, if your assessment is based on actual cost and benefits, you can really find this situation or this part very useful for you. Thank you.